welcome. Today we will discuss some general rules to Horizon Europe and gender equality, and as well through our colleague Andrea from NCPE, we will have a look at gender equality audits, which is another important part of gender equality plans. So, an introduction to Horizon Europe. Horizon Europe is the EU funding program for research and innovation. It funds several areas. Mainly it's split into 3 pillars. So the first pillar is excellent science, where we have the European Research Council, the MSCA, and research infrastructures. Here, mainly this pillar focuses on the researcher's career. So here we can find things like staff exchanges, etc. Pillar 2 is the global challenges and European industrial competitiveness. So here we have what we call the clusters. The Commission has identified a set of challenges, a set of issues that not only Europe faces, but the whole world. And these issues range from health issues, culture, security, digital, industry, space, climate, energy, mobility, food, environment, etc. And here the calls are very much top-down, which means that the Commission issues calls, and then you have to come up with an innovative idea to solve that issue. For example, then we go on pillar 3, which is Innovative Europe. Innovative Europe is split into the EIC, EIE, and EIT, and here we are mainly targeting the industry. And here you come up with a very innovative and breakthrough idea, and the Commission funds. The idea could be on several different topics. Then we have the widening participation and strengthening the European research area, which mainly has opportunities to assist widening countries to become better and take up more funding from Horizon Europe. Malta is a widening country, so we have a good advantage within this area. We move on to the participation criteria. So you have normally as a general rule, however, this does not apply for all the pillars, but it's a general rule that you have to at least be 3 partners from 3 different member states or associated countries. So that would be you from Malta and 2 others at least. It could be more. You can bring anyone on board from any country. Everyone is eligible to participate, but then the question is if they're going to get funding or not. If you're a member state or an associated country, you will have funding. Obviously, allocate necessary resources for the duration of the project and have no double funding. So try not to claim, do not claim actually the same item through different funding streams. There's also some different criteria within certain like EIC, ERC, MSCAs, etc. But there's a new novelty under Horizon Europe. There is a new participation criteria, a new eligibility criteria, which are the gender equality plans. Now, if you are a public body, a research organization, or a higher education institution, and here the participants are all representing public bodies. So this is an eligibility criteria for you. You must have a gender equality plan or equivalent strategy in place to be eligible for funding. Now, let's not mistake a policy with a plan or a strategy. The policy is not equivalent to a plan. This is very clear. A plan has targets, a plan has deadlines, and a plan has indicators as well. So that is the difference. How will the Commission know if you actually have a gender equality plan or not? Well, when you apply for a project, the Commission will ask you black on white, do you have a gender equality plan in place? And you have to mark yes or no. If you mark yes, then you are eligible. If you mark no, then you are not eligible. You do not have to upload any documents. The Commission will simply ask you if you have a gender equality plan published on your website. However, gender equality plan checks will commence this year towards the end of 2022 for the projects that have deadlines from 2022 onwards. So this is something very, very important. If you really want to retain funding, the Commission has its rights to remove any funding and withdraw any funding if they realize that you do not have a gender equality plan or you have breached the eligibility rules. So exactly, there will be regular checks to Horizon Europe, and again, equivalent documents such as a strategic plan or an inclusion strategy are accepted, but simply not, a policy will not be enough. Introduction to gender in Horizon Europe. So why is the Commission doing this? Mainly because they want to have gender equality plans in place, and they are doing this push to making it an eligibility criteria. They want to integrate the gender dimension into research and innovation content, and they want to increase the gender balance throughout the program. This is another objective, and they have a target of 50% women in Horizon Europe-related boards, expert groups, evaluation committees, and gender balance among research teams set as a ranking criterion for proposals with the same score. What does this mean? So if there are, there's a call and only one project will be selected, both of these projects have ranked exactly the same, then they will base their decision finally if you have a gender balance within your team. So first, the project will be awarded based on how much marks you receive, how much your proposal has scored. If there is a case where there are two proposals that have scored exactly the same, then this decision will rely on who has the better gender equality inclusion aspect in their proposal. Then again, there are certain calls where gender equality issues might not be as relevant, and the Commission will clearly state this within the topics. However, as in general, there is always an element of gender equality in proposals. But the Commission will always specify when it's not as relevant as well. You will find this written in the topic details. So again, you have to have still a gender equality plan to be eligible to participate. But who has to have this gender equality plan? It is eligible at PIC level. What does PIC level means? It is the personal identification code. This is a digit code. It consists of 9 digits. And when you register on the Funding Contenders portal, you register on behalf of your organization. You can register on behalf of your ministry. Or if you have a certain legal framework where you're established and distinguished from the ministry, you might have your own PIC. So there are certain organizations that even though they are considered as public, they might have their own PIC. However, if you are normally represented by a ministry, for example, the Malta Council for Science and Technology is represented by the ministry. So we apply on behalf of the ministry, not on behalf of the Malta Council for Science and Technology. So if you search on the Funding Contenders portal, you will see the ministry's name and then the projects that we are currently running. So you have to, if you're responsible under a ministry, the ministry has to have these gender equality plans. If you are independent, you have to have your own gender equality plan. Now, these co-created building blocks are here to be respected, and these are basically have to be implemented, okay? So it must be a public document accessible on your website. You have to dedicate some resources, so dedicate equality officers or a gender equality team. Normally, these officers or this team will be the same persons that are responsible for the plan as well. However, you are allowed to allocate as many equality officers as you like. Data collection and monitoring. So this will be the focus of today's webinar. So you need to collect data, you have to report and prepare for audits as well. And training and capacity building. So here this ties in well with the dedicated resources. Organize some training, some workshops with regards to gender equality, and CPE has very good training material as well, and they provide their free services to assist you in training and capacity building as well. Some recommended areas to be covered by the gender equality plans. So these are recommended. Unlike the co-created building blocks, you can opt to have these in your plan or to not have these in your plan. So once you have your plan, you have to include certain areas that you want to target within your organization. So the Commission has provided these as examples, but they are very good examples, and I do suggest that you take them on board. So I think I accidentally launched the poll. So again, the recommended areas to be covered by the gender equality plans. So we have the work-life balance and organizational culture, the gender balance in leadership and decision-making, gender equality in recruitment and career progression, integration of the gender dimension into research and teaching content, and measures against gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. So this is a cycle in the sense that you will design and plan. You will also have to implement this plan. You have to evaluate and monitor it, and then you analyze and audit it so that you can improve on it and have a better gender equality plan. So this all feeds, the process all feeds into each other. So what is a gender equality audit? It's different from a financial audit. This is a social audit, and it belongs to the category of quality audits. So this is a bit different from the traditional audits, and our colleagues here from NCPE will also give further information on this. Some resources for help: the Gender Action Project, the GENE tool, the GER tool, the Gender Equality Training from the European Institute for Gender Equality, RRI tools, and Gendered Innovation 2 fact sheets. Please keep in touch. Here's our links: Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, the MCST website, and other MCST funding opportunities as well if you're interested in them. And here is the team of the National Contact Point. So we all cover different areas, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any gender equality related issues, as well as some other issues related to Horizon Europe. We have a no wrongler approach, so we will direct you in the right direction. So I give the floor to my colleague Andrea Kallus to take over the rest of the session.
Hi, thanks, Tamara. Good morning, everyone. So in this session, we will be outlining the gender equality audit and how this fits in and how it is important for the first block, let's say the first building block for developing a gender equality plan. I will be showing a presentation I prepared. So anytime, however, you would like to seek clarification or ask questions or have comments to make, please just state so. Okay, I will not leave, or perhaps we will have some time at the end specifically to discuss concerns or questions you might have, but anytime throughout the presentation, feel free to ask. Okay, so let's start. I'll start sharing my presentation. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Just a very quick introduction to who we are. We are the NCPE, the National Commission for the Promotion of Equality, which is the national equality body in Malta. So we are responsible for a law that prohibits discrimination, whether it's direct or indirect harassment, sexual harassment, but also beyond these legal provisions against discrimination and harassment, we are also responsible for promoting equality. And as we will see, and as I will emphasize throughout this presentation, equality is not simply about the prohibition of discrimination. And in fact, when we will be looking at developing gender equality plans and at conducting a gender equality audit, we will go beyond the prohibition of discrimination to think and to assess the achievement of equality, gender equality in this case, mostly equality in practice. That is the real de facto practical position of women and men within the organization, as well as in terms of the services we are delivering, the policies we are developing. Okay, so it's very important to understand the gender equality plan, as well as to understand how to effectively conduct a gender equality audit to bear this in mind. If we understand equality simply as a matter of, look, here, all the training we offer, all the recruitment we carry out, it's open to everyone, women and men. So we have no gender equality issues because on paper, we do not discriminate. We do not make any distinctions. Well, that is the wrong approach to developing a gender equality plan and to conducting the gender equality audit. What we need to assess here actually are differences and are access not on paper, but in practice. Okay, so we have to look at imbalances, at gaps, at inequalities between women and men within the organization, as well as in terms of the services, policies, strategies that we draft and deliver. Okay, so this is a very important distinction, and I am highlighting and emphasizing this because I am aware that usually this is where the challenge lies. We are very much used to understanding equality as a matter of seeing everyone the same, as a matter of not making distinction between the sexes in this case, for example. No, that is not what equality is about. Equality is about actually uncovering differences, because through uncovering differences, we understand equality and inequality in practice. Okay? So, the gender equality audit. Let's start by looking at the definition, and then we'll locate the audit. Where does it fit in this process of developing a gender equality plan? But let's start with a definition. First, a gender audit or a gender equality audit is a tool. Important word. It's not a principle. It's not even a strategy. It's a tool. So we are using it in something that is broader. We are using it first and foremost because we want, as a principle, we want to achieve gender equality in practice, but also because it's part of a strategy that we have in place or that we are developing. In this case, a gender equality plan. But it's a tool. It's one of the many tools we might and we have to use in order to develop all this. So it's a tool to assess. We are assessing here. We are the gender equality audit. What it does, it helps us understand. It is not an action tool. That will be the gender equality plan. Here we are defining. Here we are assessing. Here we are understanding. To assess and check the institutionalization of gender equality into organizations, so into your organization, whether it's the ministry or a public entity. Now, an organization has many dimensions to it. And when we conduct a gender equality audit, we can look at the different dimensions of the organization. We might look at all of them, or we might choose a few of them, depending on the scope. Depending on the scope we want to establish for the gender equality audit. But this can include the policies, the programs, the projects that we carry out, the provision of services. So those, the policies, the programs, the projects, the provision of services, that's the external part. So of course, they are being developed internally, but they are being developed internally, but looking externally, looking outside of the organization when we develop a policy, a program, a project, a service that is being delivered to a target group, the public in general. Okay, and that's very important, and that is usually where a concern, a deep concern for gender equality lacks, because we assume that the policies, the programs, the projects, the provision of services, we assume that they are gender neutral, when they are not. In practice, they impact women and men differently. And then also the structures, the proceedings, and budgets, and I would add here also internal policies. So, and those parts are now internal to the organization. It's not about the services or the programs we are delivering to groups that are outside of the organization, but there we are assessing internally the situation of gender equality. How are women and men being impacted, positioned structurally within the organization itself? So as you can see, the gender equality audit can cover all of the work the organization does, the work and as well as structures. Now, we also have to look to understand where the idea of a gender equality plan, of a gender equality audit comes from. We have to define what gender mainstreaming is. So I have to say that gender mainstreaming has been official government policy from 2012. Also annually, departments, entities, ministries, they have to report on the work they have done in terms of gender mainstreaming. And gender mainstreaming is basically what I have just explained, not in terms of gender equality audit, which is a tool, but it's part of it. This is a strategy. Gender mainstreaming is about integrating a gender equality concern, what we call the gender perspective, to everything that we do. So it is not about we treat everyone the same regardless of gender. No, gender mainstreaming is about when we develop a policy, a program, a strategy, we go actively to search what are the gender inequalities in that area, what are the gender gaps, what are the gender differences, and then move on to actively integrate those different needs and concerns, aspirations that will be different for women and men, and integrate all that in the policy, the program, the action we are designing. Okay, so gender mainstreaming is of course much broader than simply the gender equality audit or the gender equality plan, but it is a prerequisite for understanding. Because it is what underpins, let's say, the idea of a gender equality audit and also of a gender equality plan. It is about actively looking at gender equality and inequalities, because it is recognizing that gender inequalities are not simply a matter, they are also, but they are not simply a matter of discrimination. They are something beyond that. They are about the structures in themselves, how they are shaped, and how they affect us in practice as women and men, because our experiences as women and men are different. The pattern of experiences is different. So nothing can be neutral in practice, because how will it impact us will be different, because our experiences are different. So this is a definition that is very important to understand than all the other items we will be discussing. Audit. When we talk, so I'm moving back to discussing, to defining what a gender equality audit is. Let's say an audit can be internal or can be external. What we mean is it's always internal, in the sense it's always looking at the organization, the different processes, procedures, policies, but it can be held, it can be conducted internally, that is by persons within the organization itself. It can be also external, when one makes use of consultants, of a company or an entity that comes into the organization to look at its work from an equality perspective. Here we are discussing mostly, because we assume that for the purpose of Developing a gender equality plan in terms also as a requirement for Horizon Europe funding. It will be conducted by persons who are internal to the ministry or the entity. One point which I think we need to emphasize, it's not about gender equality audit per se, about the gender equality plan, is that the gender equality plan is for the organization. So for the ministry or the entity. It is not for the specific Horizon Europe project you will be applying for, okay? So to apply for it and to be eligible, you need to have a gender equality plan. But the gender equality plan is for the whole and for all work of the organization and not simply for that project itself. Of course, it does, however, influence then the individual projects you would be applying for and potentially implementing. So, okay, so let's go back to the audit, an internal audit. So how do we prepare? What are, let's say, the main points that we need to understand before actually starting to prepare this audit? Why are we doing it? In the sense, what do we want from it? And this is something that we have to elaborate further. What do we want from the audit is a very important question, and the answer might not be so straightforward, so it needs some thought. But the general principles that underpin an audit are because we want to understand. As I said, an audit is about mostly understanding how much the organization fosters gender equality internally within its organizational, managerial, structure, and internal work. So is there, and to what extent, is there this a fostering of the importance and awareness of the importance of gender equality? That's the very, very basic point. Then we have to understand, of course, whether this, whether if there is this attention to gender equality, if there is a fostering, if there is a culture to being attentive to gender equality in the organizational and managerial structures in the internal work, whether these are actually effective, whether they are contributing to the achievement of gender equality within the organization, and as I say, gender equality in practice. It's also an opportunity to monitor and assess the progress made in gender mainstreaming, what I have just defined, and gender equality more broadly. So has the organization along the years improved in terms of gender equality and in terms of implementing the gender mainstreaming strategy? The audit can contribute and should contribute to capacity building and to the collective ownership for gender equality initiatives. In fact, as we will emphasize later on, it should adopt a participatory approach. Okay, so by consulting, because an audit will entail discussing gender equality issue with the different employees at the different levels of the organization. Also identifying what the gaps in terms of awareness of gender equality are. But this whole exercise, the exercise of the gender equality audit itself, is in itself a way of starting to build this collective ownership for gender equality initiatives. And this is the last bullet point, is what, let's say, the ultimate aim of the internal of an internal gender equality audit is that it sharpens the organizational learning on gender through carrying out. So okay, we need to get some knowledge on gender equality, on the scope of the audit itself before we start the audit. But in the process of carrying out this audit, We will learn. We will learn a lot. We will think. We will discover things that we hadn't thought about before, and this will sharpen our knowledge, our ability to achieve gender equality in practice. When to carry out a gender audit? What you have there is a diagram, which is the, let's say, the very basic policy cycle. So we start when we are developing a policy or an action, not necessarily a gender equality audit, but as we'll see, a gender equality audit too. We usually go through more or less 4 different stages. First, we define what do we want to achieve by a policy, what do we want, why are we doing it? So what areas will it cover, its scope. Then we will plan, we will write it down, and we will develop all the planned actions, measures based on an analysis that usually would have been started at the define stage. Then we act, we implement it, and then we check. We check whether the implementation of the policy was effective, whether it achieved the desired goals, etc. When we talk about the gender equality audit in the context of developing a gender equality plan, we are referring to the define stage. We are at that stage. The gender equality audit is about defining. We will define what the then gender equality plan will outline, will contain. So, and that then the gender equality plan will be the plan stage. Then the implementation of the gender equality plan will be the act stage. And then, of course, we will need to check whether the gender equality plan is being effective, whether the actions outlined are having the desired effects, etc. And that would be the check stage. But with the gender equality audit, we are at the define stage. So the title of the slide was when to carry out a gender equality audit. A gender equality audit could be carried out for a number of reasons. I'm assuming that here we want to conduct a gender equality audit because we want to develop a gender equality plan, especially in the context of Horizon Europe funding. So this is something that we should emphasize about the gender equality plan itself. The gender equality plan, I know you have a template has been shared with you about possible areas that it could cover, possible measures that it could contain, but that is just an example, because a gender equality plan is very important, is not first and foremost a declaration of principles of how we have equality in our hearts, of how we value diversity. That's not what the gender equality plan is about. The gender equality plan should address gender gaps and inequalities within the organization. It's about tangible measures and ways of achieving the targets we will set. So if a gender equality plan cannot be a template. Of course, one can look at a template to structure one's thoughts, but a gender equality plan has to be necessarily tailor-made for the specific ministry or entity in this case, because it is about addressing a gap or an inequality that exists. If one thinks that everything in the organization in terms of gender equality is perfect, then one wouldn't need a gender equality plan. It would be impossible to do a gender equality plan if everything is perfect, if there is perfect equality in practice between women and men. But we know that is not the case. We know that the gender inequalities, different forms of gender inequalities are there. They always exist in every ministry, in every entity, both internally as well in terms of the work it does. That might not always be equally beneficial to women and men in the social context broadly. Okay, so that is what the gender equality plan should be doing. So how can we do a gender equality plan before first identifying what are the gaps, what are the inequalities, and this is very important, what is the causes of such gaps and inequalities? And there is where the analysis part kicks in. It's not just about collection of data that helps us identify those gaps and inequalities, but it is also understanding why those gaps and inequalities exist. And we will be providing some examples soon. So this is a prerequisite for developing the gender equality plan, since the audit will analyze and assess the status quo and the inequalities present in the status quo. So, because I might be overemphasizing this, but over the years of experience we have, we sometimes see that the point of departure usually is a defensive one. We do not have a gender equality problem in our organization. Women and men, they are equal, we give family-friendly measure. That shouldn't be the point of departure to developing the gender equality plan and conducting the gender equality audit. No, the point of departure has to be that this status quo inevitably has gender inequalities embedded into it. And our task here is to find them, even if they are not immediately visible to us, but we need to find them. We need to find where they are because they are there. Okay? So that's why we need to analyze and assess. To do this, and we will delve more into this in a few slides, we need to collect sex disaggregated data. That is, we need to look at women, the numbers, here we're talking about numbers mostly of women and men in the different and their participation in the different processes, at the different levels of the organization, etc. We will explain this more. And it will critically review the organizational procedures, processes, and practices. So every organization has several different procedures, processes, and practices. We will now look at these aspects from the gender perspective. How is the impact? What is the impact of these procedures, processes, and practices on women and men? And how is it different? Because although they are there for everyone in the same way, their impact on women and men will be different because their life experiences, their social experiences, their work experiences, they are different. I'll stop this for a second. And I would like to hear if there are any questions at this stage or comments or any remark you would like to make. Is this clear so far? Has it been too abstract? Hopefully we will move on to look at some examples soon. But I want to know your feedback so far. Is it something which you are understanding what the gender equality plan and the gender equality audit is? Okay, is anyone, if someone is talking, someone is muted perhaps because I'm seeing Antoinette talking, but I'm not hearing her.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Antoinette, we cannot hear you.
Okay, no worries. I mean, if you'll manage to solve the issue, then we can.
Yeah, maybe there's a microphone
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we'll resume with the presentation if there are no further remarks. Okay, so far we have defined what the gender equality audit is, and we have placed the gender equality audit within a broader process that is within the strategy for gender mainstreaming, but more specifically within the development of a gender equality plan, also in the context of Horizon Europe funding. Now, let's start looking at the practical steps for preparing and eventually conducting the gender equality audit. Something happened to my presentation. It's not changing slides. Let me stop this.
To reshare the screen, maybe?
It wasn't it shared?
No, it's not shared.
Okay. Well, here it shows it. Don't worry. I'll close it and.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. That's okay. Is that fine?
Yes.
Okay. So let's set the scene. So we know we're at the point where we say, okay, we need to develop this gender equality plan. And as a first step, we need to carry out a gender equality audit, and we need to set the scene. First, there needs to be commitment of top management to it, since we will need to look at the different processes, at documentation, at past experiences. Of course, it would be very, very difficult to conduct a serious gender equality audit without having the commitment of top management, but there has to be a commitment across the organization to the principles of gender equality, to developing the technical capacity and competences on gender equality and gender mainstreaming. There needs to be the will, let's say, that if there is no will, and thus the commitment, it will be very, very difficult to have a real gender equality audit that really uncovers and identifies the inequalities that exist. Now, a gender equality audit is not something to be done by one person. There needs to be a team because you need to discuss. Discussion is very, very important. And of course, there needs to be also a division of tasks and a division of work. Who should this team, who should make part of this team? It needs, in this case, since we are assuming it will be an internal audit, it will be made up of staff. Ideally, persons or a mixture of both top management and others, but top management should be represented in it for sure. And there should, of course, be a degree of knowledge about gender equality, diversity, management. And also it's very important to have within the team someone from or that is aware of human resource issues. Okay. Although the gender equality audit is not only about human resources, but that will be a very important part of it. So it's important to choose a team. Doesn't need to be a very large team. Let's say 4 or 5 persons if it is a ministry, composed of persons from different backgrounds, positions, possibly, and with the knowledge to be able to carry out a gender equality audit. Now, one could also gain this knowledge in the sense that one can share. There are a lot of resources online. One can read about it, of course, besides this presentation right now, which gives a very brief introduction. But it is possible to gain knowledge on the gender equality issues, the gender equality plans, and the conduction of a gender equality audit. Then the first thing that this team will do will be develop a gender audit strategy. First, it needs to set the gender equality objectives. As we have discussed, the scope of a gender equality audit can be very broad. We might want to narrow that down or not. We might want to keep it broad, but it needs to have objectives. And in this case, one of the objectives is that this should allow us to develop an effective gender equality plan. So we need to understand what are the gender inequalities and the causes for these gender inequalities in those spheres that will be covered by the gender equality plan. Determining at which level the gender audit will be carried out. So will it mostly start from management, for example, or will it be carried out by the team itself that includes persons from the different levels of the organization? Then this third bullet point is important because it is mapping out. This is practically looking at what we will be doing during the audit. Who are the relevant actors? So who we will be talking to, and to discover what. Okay, so one needs to do at that point a breakdown of the different players, the different employees, and what we want that we will be talking to, that we will ask for material from, and to what end. And it's very important that in the team itself, there is a gender balance so that both women and men are represented in the audit team, but not only, they are also represented in the gender equality audit process. Okay, so that when we are consulting with the different employees, we have a mixture of both women and men. That is the C. That is our first step. Constitute the team, and then the team develops a strategy, a practical strategy for carrying out the audit. This needs to be developed within a conceptual framework based on the policy objectives against which the audit is conducted. So if we are talking about gender equality audits that are being carried out in the context of Horizon Europe funding, we will inevitably have to look at those areas that we heard in the previous, that we saw in the previous presentation, that are outlined by the Horizon Europe funding, which are of course the most important areas to look out in terms of gender gaps and inequalities. And so what the audit will seek to do is uncover gender inequalities and gender differences, because there might be gender differences that are not necessarily inequalities in these areas. That is the areas outlined by the Horizon Europe recommendation. That is work-life balance and organizational culture, work-life balance in terms of the public service and sector. We are looking mostly at the family-friendly measures and how they are taken up by women and men, etc., and how they are administered, the process, the procedures for applying, for making use of them, etc. The organizational culture goes beyond that. It's about what environment within the organization there is for women and men, if they are being valued equally in practice, if they are being given equal exposure, for example, equal weight in what they say and in what they do. It can be a bit not tangible when we talk about the organizational culture, but there are ways and means to assess that, even through a qualitative assessment on what the organizational culture is. The gender balance in leadership and decision making, there's about looking at women and men within the organization and how they are positioned in terms of top positions, in terms of leading projects, policies, programs, etc. Okay, so leadership and decision making. Gender equality in recruitment and career progression. Recruitment, again, here we know that the initial reaction will be, look, we are bound by public service rules for recruitment, so absolutely there is no issue, we're fine, everyone can apply, everyone can be accepted. No, we have to dig deeper than that, and we have to see in practice how the different recruitment processes, the establishment of criteria, for example, for jobs, how they might impact differently women and men. And the same with career advancement. Now, the fourth bullet point is very important, especially because in Horizon Europe projects, there is a very important element of the carrying out of research. So there, it is about integrating the gender dimension into research and other actions. Now, this is, with difference to the four other points, this is not about what is being done by the organization for the organization itself, like the provision of family-friendly measures or recruitment. This is about what we are doing, how we are integrating, whether and to what extent we are integrating a gender equality perspective into our action, into the different actions. For example, when we provide a service, do we make sure that we provide the service in a way that is equally accessible in practice to women and men and persons with family responsibilities? When we gather data from that action, is that data disaggregated by sex to see in practice who benefited from that scheme, for example, or from that service? Where women and men equally represented, for example, in terms of persons who made use of a scheme or a service? That's one example, but also into research. When we are developing a research project, are we making sure that we are integrating a gender equality concern into it, that we are looking at the different needs and concerns that women and men might have in that area, and thus doing further research into them? The same with data. The data we collect when we do research, is it disaggregated by sex, thus allowing us to see gender differences, gaps, inequalities? Okay, that's very important. So in the audit, we want to look at what the organization has done and what it plans to do, or what it is doing right now. Is it, has it, and is it integrating the gender dimension into research and other actions? The fourth point is measures against gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. Of course, the sexual harassment part is particularly important. We're talking about the ability of the organization to address, to prevent harassment and sexual harassment. Are there policies in place? Are the employees aware of them? Are the procedures for reporting harassment and sexual harassment adequate? These are the questions that we would need to ask. So with the conceptual framework, we will start by outlining, okay, we want to understand inequalities through the gender equality audit within these areas, which are the areas provided by the Horizon Europe funding, let's say. Okay, now there is also the approach. I mentioned this at the start. It needs to adopt a participatory approach. So it shouldn't be something that, okay, those 3 or 4 persons are doing, it's their task, they are just responsible for it, for the others shouldn't or are not involved. No, this is really about involving everyone. So although there should be a team, the team is not about doing everything itself, but it is about making sure that everyone is as much involved in it. Everyone is allowed to contribute to it through interviews, through the provision of material, etc. Okay, it's very, because this is, in one of the first slides, there was this point. There was a point saying, because a gender equality audit is also an opportunity for developing capacity building and collective ownership. And so that's why the participatory approach is very important. We all also have our biases, and it's inevitable. Everyone has them. It is important to be as objective as possible. And the way to do that is also to start at the point of departure that gender inequality is there. And I'm not saying, and this is objective, because we know we live in a society where there are multiple gender inequalities in terms of resources, the power, how it is distributed between women and men, the status that they have. The social context is that it is a social context of gender inequalities, not much in terms of the law or on paper, but in practice, they are there. And so the workplace, the ministry, the entity will, to some extent, more or less reflect those gender inequalities too. So our point of departure is that we have to uncover them. And so we have to look at the picture as objectively as possible, and also make sure to always use gender sensitive language in what we do, and also in the report that will come out of the audit. Gender sensitive language is different from gender neutral language. It is not a language that simply glosses over the different needs, gaps, differences between women and men. No, it is actually a language that brings those differences to light. So we have to use a language that always refers to women and men, the different imbalances, gaps that exist. That is the gender sensitive language that we will use, that we should be using, because the language itself and the kind of language we use will help us uncover stuff. I have referred to this. This is probably you're aware of what it means, but this is a pillar for gender mainstreaming, for the gender equality plan, and for conducting the gender equality audit, and that is sex disaggregated data. So with data, when we try to use or reproduce ourselves numbers in terms of, for example, looking at different persons within the different levels of the ministry or the entity, or looking at persons who made use of a service, right? Or persons within the ministry or the entity that participated in training. Instead of looking at aggregate numbers, 6% participated in that training on IT, we'll look at data broken down by sex. We say, for example, 3 men and 2 women participated in that particular training. And this, of course, as you can see, will help us understand what the differences and the inequalities are. It just gives us the picture of what the situation is. Then we will have to dig deeper in order to understand why that imbalance exists. And usually there is a multiplicity of reasons why an inequality and an imbalance exists. But first, we have to understand that it is there and that we need to look into this further. So sex disaggregated data is essential. Now, in the gender equality audit, the importance and our concern with sex disaggregated data will be twofold. First, we have to make use of data that is sex disaggregated in order to carry out the audit itself. In order, as I said, the audit is concerned with uncovering the differences, with uncovering inequalities, and so we need data that is disaggregated by sex to be able to do this. But also there is another aspect to this, and that is the audit itself. One of the areas it will most likely assess is whether the organization in its different operations, in its work, in the collection of data, in the use of data for the different work processes that it is responsible for, whether the organization is aware and is making use of data that is disaggregated by sex. Because that might be something in itself that then needs to be included in the gender equality plan. The gender equality plan, for example, might state, look, one of our actions, our targets will be that in every policy, program, action, project, or service we will be developing and implementing, we will make sure to make use of data that is disaggregated by sex. So the audit is concerned with data that is disaggregated by sex, one, because it needs it in order to be effective, to understand what the inequalities are, but also in terms of assessing whether there is awareness on the importance of data disaggregated by sex, not just awareness, also in terms of knowledge, how it should be used in an effective way. We know that there is a lack of awareness. So one thing I mentioned is that we are that entities, departments, ministries, they have to submit their annual report on gender mainstreaming, and data that is disaggregated by sex is essential for conducting a gender mainstreaming exercise. And one of the questions in this report is whether the organization makes use of and produces data that is disaggregated by sex. And most of the answers state that this is only used in the sphere of human resources, where it's very important that it is used always, not only in that sphere, in terms of service, provision, development of policies, etc. And from those answers, we also identify that there is a lack of understanding of why this kind of data is important. We have like some answers stating, no, we do not discriminate between women and men. So definitely we do not collect data that is disaggregated by sex. Of course, that is a very wrong answer, because no, collecting data that is disaggregated by sex is not a question of discrimination. It is the opposite. It is understanding what inequalities there are, and then that will lead to a process of how those inequalities can be addressed. So some examples, I've already mentioned some of these as we went along. So when we are going to decide what to analyze, what to check during this gender equality audit, one could consider these 4 examples. Again, I emphasize these are just examples. There can be others. For example, we can analyze the participation of women and men in the different training programs offered by the organization. And again, the initial reaction might be, but everyone, we never deny the opportunity to someone, whether male or female, to participate in a training program. Well, that is the point of the gender equality audit. The gender equality audit is saying, okay, the opportunity formally might be there. You are not discriminating against women and men in terms of saying, you know, a program is open only for one sex and not the other. But we have to look practically if there is an imbalance in the take-up of training programs. Why does that imbalance occur? And if there is an imbalance, there is a reason for it. It might be that training is being more for example, I'm just providing examples here. Is it that training might be only offered about those subjects that are in male-dominated areas, for example? Because then, of course, it's very easy that you will have many more men participating in them. Or is it about the time? Is it being offered during a time of the day where persons with family responsibilities, and we know that women more than men are usually responsible for care, then of course that also might be a reason why there is, let's say, more uptake from men than from women. Okay, so whether we can check whether the organizational has and whether they are adequate, and whether there is awareness of internal policies covering discrimination, harassments, etc. For example, one here might say, there is the PSMC, and it has an equality policy, a policy on sexual harassment. Okay, but is that enough? Is there actually awareness about this? Or do we need something more? Do we need to translate that into something that is more immediately accessible to the persons within the ministry and the entity, for example? Or do we need to increase awareness of it? We can analyze the take-up of family-friendly measures. Now, again, it's not about saying anyone can make use of them, if of course there are the right conditions in place. We have to look at how are they accessible in practice to women and men, And are there any gender differences? And for sure, there will be massive gender differences in this case in the take-up of family-friendly measures. Is there any way we could close that gap and, for example, incentivize males to also make use of family-friendly measures? Can family-friendly measures be taken at all levels of the organization? Are there any barriers that are perhaps unreasonable to the take-up of family-friendly measures? These are some questions we could ask. But of course, there also we need data that is disaggregated by sex in order to uncover differences. And the fourth bullet point is something I have already mentioned. It is whether sex disaggregated data is being used in the carrying out of research and the drafting, implementation, and monitoring of programs. Check the gender balance at the different level of the organization. How is the distribution of women and men in the different areas of work, and as well in the hierarchy of the organization? And also check the rate of women and men who applied for different positions, who were recruited, or who advanced in their careers. Okay, and see whether there are any differences, whether there are any inequalities, and then try to understand why those inequalities exist, and then try to understand what can we do. And that is what should then go into the gender equality plan, what we can do to overcome, to address these inequalities. Carrying out the gender equality audit. So here we've prepared, we've seen the importance of sex disaggregated data, some examples of what we are going to analyze, check, and assess. And now we start carrying it out. And that can include both, we need to collect data, we need to analyze it, and that requires not just a quantitative approach, but also a qualitative one, talking to the different employees and trying to understand the reasons for any imbalances that have been identified, and then we have to formulate the audit findings, draw up a report, and that will form the basis of the gender equality plan. Because we would say, look, we've carried out this audit, this is what we found, and we found that there are these inequality, most likely for these reasons, and now we will have a gender equality plan to address them. Now, in practice, the gender equality audit will include both a desk review of documents, of policies, procedures, etc. Consultation, could be interviews, it could be focus groups, it could be self-assessments, it could be surveys, okay? Any tool you might deem appropriate to gather the information you need. Yeah, the consultation really gives us the deep understanding why the data that is sex disaggregated gives us, let's say, the areas where inequality exists. The consultation allows us to have a deeper understanding of why those inequalities exist. Then we need the tabulation and the analysis of all data, quantitative and qualitative, that has been collected. And then it's also good that we share and discuss the findings. Again, the participatory approach. So we just do not keep the findings to ourselves and make them automatically feed in the gender equality plan. It's good to discuss those findings with women and men and see what they think about them, because we might need to correct them, or we might need to tweak some of the findings after further consultation. And then this is what will eventually lead to the gender equality plan that is based on the audit findings. Some key questions that we can ask during audits. This is mostly a bit highlighting once again many of the points I have mentioned so far. But is the audit allowing us to understand how is gender equality perceived in the organization? Is there broad support or internal resistance to the concept? Are there gender imbalances at the different levels of the organization? If yes, why? Are there gender imbalances in recruitment and career advancement? If yes, why? Again, it's not enough to say we give the same opportunity to everyone, because often in practice, not everyone has the same opportunity. We have to understand why and to what extent and how we can address it. Are there gender imbalances in training participation overall and also within the different training programs? For example, are we making sure that training is not being offered in a stereotypical way, that areas we associate with males, we send males to participate in training, and those areas we associate mostly with females, we send women in those cases? Are we making sure? No, not to base our decisions and attitudes on stereotypes. But of course, there might be other reasons for gender imbalances in training. So do they exist? And if yes, why? Are there gender imbalances in the take-up of family-friendly measures? Again, why, if there are? And there will be for sure. Mela, are there internal policies that aim to prevent and address discrimination and sexual harassment? Are they effective? And are the employees aware of them? Do staff understand the gender mainstreaming strategy and do they have the awareness and knowledge to implement it effectively? Are initiatives, the different initiatives, based on a gender analysis? Again, what we have said, the use of data that is sex disaggregated, etc., in order to guarantee that any gender inequalities and differences have been identified and taken into account in the different actions we do as an organization? To what extent is gender included in the objectives of policies, programs, projects, or service provision? To what extent are challenges in terms of gender addressed in the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of initiatives? And the last point also, but there can be other questions, of course. Again, it will depend on the scope of your exercise. So we have to understand to what extent sex disaggregated data is collected and used, but also whether there are indicators, whether in the different policies, programs, projects, etc., they have indicators that allow us to understand whether the gender equality objectives have been achieved. Now, the last point is about using indicators, the last part of the slide of this presentation. And now we will talk about using indicators within the gender equality plan. So we have conducted the gender equality audit, we have the findings, and on the basis of those findings, we are developing a gender equality plan. And in this gender equality plan, we need to first outline what needs to be addressed, how we are going to address it, the resources that we are going to use to allocate so that we can effectively address those areas, the inequalities in those areas. And we will need targets and indicators. We will need something that allows us to understand whether the actions we have outlined, the measures we have planned, are actually leading to change. And that we need to set targets and indicators to help us understand whether those targets are being met. So here we are talking then about gender indicators, indicators that are concerned with gender equality. This is another tool in the same way that a gender audit is a tool in the broader scheme of things in developing a gender equality plan and gender mainstreaming and the principle of gender equality. Gender indicators are another of these tools. They allow us to monitor gender differences, gender-related changes over time, and progress towards gender equality goals. What is good about indicators is they allow us to measure performance and achievement. So the indicators we are going to include in the gender equality plan, they need to reveal, because the indicators, that's what they do. They reveal to us, we might think something, we might perceive that something is working or not working, but we will never be sure if we do not have indicators saying, look, over a period of 2 years, for example, the balance of women and men in top management positions changed. It was, let's say, 70-30, and now it's 60-40. That is an indicator, right? The same with training, for example, or take-up of family-friendly measures. Or we can have an indicator about disaggregation of data, for example. We say, look, let's go through all the documents we have developed over the past 2 years. Let's do the total number of instances in which data has been used. So let's say in the documents we have developed over the past 2 years, there were 50 instances where we have referred to data. And now from those 50 instances, in how many of them was it disaggregated by sex? And we say, like, before there was, only in 5 instances we have used data disaggregated by sex, but now in 45 out of 50 instances, we have seen that we have used sex disaggregated data. That is an indicator. There can be a manager, but for any action that you outline in the gender equality plan and for every target, you need to have indicators to assess whether that action was effective or as effective as you would have liked, and whether the target is being met. Also, one might understand that there will have unintended impacts of an action, for example, positive or negative. But it's only through indicators that we can be sure. Okay, most of this presentation was based on material about gender equality audits that are within the website of the European Institute for Gender Equality. There you have the website. I invite you to visit their website. There are a lot of resources and material you can use. This was a summary, let's say, but you will find much more information there. Of course, you can always contact us. We will be happy to help, to give guidance in terms of conducting a gender equality audit, but also in terms of gender equality plans or equality in general. That was, I stop the share screen. Okay, we have around 2 minutes left. Was this clear? Are there any questions, comments, anything you'd like to ask or wasn't clear? Would be very happy to engage in a conversation.
Please feel free to raise your hands and unmute. But I think there are no particular questions.
Okay,
very clear.
That's good, Hope, because
Thank you
that's
for
clear.
the presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So we will share the presentations and the recordings afterwards. We will also launch a poll now to for you to review our event so that we can improve on further events and trainings. Thank you again, Andrea. That was very, very informative.